Welcome to my YouTube history channel, Utrace.
Welcome to this explainer. We've got an incredibly ambitious journey ahead of us today. We're literally going to compress thousands of years of human evolution, countless empires, and massive cultural shifts into a single, structured visual journey. We'll be tracing the entire story of the Indian subcontinent from the absolute dawn of civilization all the way up to the present day.
To really wrap our heads around this scale of this history, let's actually start with this massive number right here, 2023. In this year, India hit an absolute pinnacle of modern scientific achievement. I'm talking about Chandrayaan-3 successfully landing on the Moon's south polar region. That made India the fourth country ever to achieve a soft lunar landing, and get this, the very first to reach that specific region. It's just a phenomenal feat of modern engineering.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sheer contrast. We're jumping from literal spacecraft on the moon back to exactly 9,000 years ago. Long before highways, long before modern technology, early farmers at a place called Mehrgarh in present-day Balochistan were busy building some of the region's very first communities. They lived in these mud brick houses, they were figuring out how to grow wheat and barley, and honestly, archaeological evidence even suggests they practiced an early form of dentistry. How wild is that?
To make sense of everything between those ancient mud bricks and a lunar landing, we've organized this massive 9,000-year timeline into 6 distinct eras. 1. Dawn of a civilization. 2. Empires and spiritual awakenings. 3. The classical Golden Age. 4. Invaders, sultans, and Mughals. 5. Colonial rule and independence. And finally, 6. The modern Indian Republic. Okay, let's dive into this.
Section 1. Dawn of a civilization. From early farming to urban marvels.
It's honestly incredible to see the sheer momentum here, just how quickly these early agricultural communities transformed. Those farmers at Mehrgarh eventually paved the way for the massive Indus Valley Civilization. By 2500 BCE, we're looking at major urban centers emerging, like Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. And we're not just talking about basic settlements here. These were highly planned cities. They had standardized bricks and incredibly sophisticated drainage systems to carry wastewater away from homes, way ahead of their time. They even traded as far away as Mesopotamia. But you know, nature always has a say. By 1900 BCE, this great civilization began to decline. It was likely a mix of changing river paths, climate shifts, and weakening monsoons that ultimately forced people to pack up and migrate.
Before we move forward, we absolutely have to pause and look at this lingering mystery. The Indus people produced these really distinctive seals featuring animals, including a famous, kind of mysterious unicorn motif, along with a written script. But here's the catch. To this day, that script has never been conclusively deciphered. It's a total puzzle. If scholars can ever crack this code, a whole new understanding of their daily life, their beliefs, and their government is going to instantly unlock for us.
Section 2. Empires and Spiritual Awakenings. Philosophers, Conquerors, and Kings.
This slide brilliantly illustrates a fascinating dual evolution that was happening side by side during the Vedic period. On one hand, you've got communities organizing, agriculture expanding, and, well, violent struggles over land and resources. A great example is the famous Battle of the 10 Kings mentioned in the Rig Veda. By the 6th century BCE, large, powerful political states known as Mahajanapadas, like the mighty Magadha, were taking shape in northern India. But simultaneously, this was the exact same era that birthed India's greatest spiritual teachers. You have Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, and Mahavira, a key teacher of Jainism, both spreading revolutionary new paths that centered on compassion, ethical living, and nonviolence. It's quite the contrast, right?
But while those beautiful philosophies developed, so did massive military forces. Let's look at 2 major players here. In 326 BCE, Alexander of Macedon pushed into the northwest, fighting King Porus at the Hydaspes River and facing down terrifying Indian war elephants. Now, Alexander technically won, but his soldiers were utterly exhausted. They flat out refused to march past the Bass River, which forced a huge retreat, ending the invasion. That sudden retreat created a massive power vacuum, and the rapidly changing political landscape was quickly dominated by a new leader, Chandragupta Maurya. Guided by the brilliant strategist Chanakya, Chandragupta overthrew the Nanda dynasty and founded the Mauryan Empire. And that empire would go on to become one of the absolute largest in ancient Indian history.
Now, Chandragupta's grandson would eventually become the most famous Mauryan ruler of all, Emperor Ashoka. Ashoka's story is one of profound dichotomy. See, he started out as a highly ambitious conqueror, and his early reign was marked by intense military expansion,
including the devastating Kalinga War around 261 BCE. But witnessing the enormous destruction and suffering of that war changed him completely. The crucial takeaway here is that Ashoka's internal transformation was just as historically significant as his territorial conquests. He actually turned his back on violence, embraced Buddhism, and actively promoted Dhamma, which means compassion, tolerance, and respect. He even carved these messages into rocks and pillars across his empire. In fact, the lion capital of Sarnath, which was one of his pillars, is India's national emblem today.
Section 3, the Classical Golden Age, Trade, Art, and the Science of Zero. This brings us to the era following the Mauryan collapse. Trade along the Silk Road was connecting India globally, setting the perfect stage for a massive cultural explosion during the Gupta Empire in the 4th century CE. Widely considered a classical golden age, let's use this table to systematically break down some of their incredible achievements. In literature, you have the celebrated Sanskrit works of the great poet Kalidasa. In metallurgy, ancient metalworkers created the famous rust-resistant iron pillar of Delhi. Education absolutely flourished at global centers like Nalanda, which attracted scholars from all across Asia. But perhaps most staggeringly, in mathematics, thinkers like Aryabhata made monumental contributions. We're talking about the decimal place value system and the concept of zero, ideas that literally became fundamental to the math the entire world uses today.
Section 4. Invaders, Sultans, and Mughals. New powers and architectural masterpieces.
Moving chronologically through the fragmented post-Gupta kingdoms, we see a huge wave of Central Asian influence. You can really feel the momentum on this timeline. Over centuries, there were repeated entries from the northwest. In 712 CE, Muhammad ibn Qasim conquered Sind. Then, by the 13th century, the Delhi Sultanate had established itself as a major political force in northern India. Finally, this steady influx culminated in 1526, when Babur defeated Ibrahim Lodi at the First Battle of Panipat, and that victory officially gave birth to the Mughal Empire, which would become one of the most powerful empires in South Asian history.
This slide really perfectly contrasts the peak of Mughal administrative power with its eventual fragmentation. The Mughal era represents incredible highs. Under rulers like Akbar, the empire saw sophisticated administration, crucial regional alliances, and massive expansion. Later, Shah Jahan would commission one of the world's most famous architectural masterpieces, the Taj Mahal. But fast forward to the 18th century, and that centralized authority really began to weaken. The empire fragmented, which allowed powerful regional states, like the Marathas, the Sikhs, Mysore, and Hyderabad, to rise up and claim their own power and prominence.
Section 5. Colonial Rule and Independence. From the company to a free nation.
This era begins with the arrival of the English East India Company, which gradually transitioned from a trading operation to a dominant military power, gaining enormous influence after the Battle of Plassey in 1757. Exactly a century later, in 1857, we see a massive uprising by soldiers and civilians against company rule. This rebellion resulted in the British Crown stepping in and taking direct control in 1858, officially beginning the British Raj. Now, this colonial period did bring new infrastructure, things like railways and universities. However, it was also heavily marked by deep economic exploitation, political repression, and absolutely devastating famines. Finally, after nearly 2 centuries of colonial dominance, mass struggles across the country led to independence on August 15, 1947. Though, it's important to note, this freedom was accompanied by the enormous human tragedy and massive displacement of partition.
Let's move to this next slide and see how this all builds, because the method of achieving that independence was truly revolutionary. By the 20th century, Indian nationalism had grown into a massive movement. Leaders like Mahatma Gandhi deployed a highly specific methodology. By utilizing mass civil disobedience and nonviolent resistance, this approach uniquely empowered millions of everyday ordinary Indians to actively challenge British rule. And they stood right alongside a diverse array of other incredibly influential leaders like Jawaharlal Nehru, Subhash Chandra Bose, Sardar Patel, and Bhagat Singh.
Section 6, the Modern Indian Republic, Building a Democracy and Reaching the Stars.
So, how does a newly independent, incredibly diverse country tackle the massive challenge of building a stable democracy? The foundation was the Constitution of India, officially adopted on January 26, 1950. From there, the focused efforts of this new republic rapidly transformed the nation. They massively expanded education and built out modern infrastructure. The Green Revolution systematically increased food production, which is just an amazing leap forward when you connect it back to those early wheat farmers at Mehrgarh. And they invested heavily in science, developing launch vehicles, communication systems, and some seriously advanced space technologies. Which brings our narrative completely full circle. It is a stunning, unbroken continuum of an incredible 9,000-year journey. We've literally gone from ancient mud bricks in a Balochistan settlement, all the way to advanced machines successfully touching down on the lunar South Pole.
As we wrap up, there's a powerful quote from our source material that I want to read because it summarizes this perfectly. Quote, "India's history is not simply the history of kings. It is the history of millions of people, thousands of communities, countless ideas, and thousands of years of change." Unquote. The true story of this civilization doesn't just live in grand palaces or battlefields. It lives in the resilience, the innovation, and the daily lives of everyday people, generation after generation.
And that leaves us with one final, awe-inspiring thought. The story that began thousands of years ago is literally still being written today. So I have to ask you, if a civilization can evolve from the very first brick of an ancient settlement to launching spacecraft onto the moon, what will the next generation write in the story of India? Thank you so much for exploring this fascinating journey with me. Keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next.
Your support means a lot. See you in the next video.